this video, I'm going to walk through the steps of using a Java program to write data to a MySQL database using SQL statements. So we're going to use a couple of pieces of software in this particular video. I'm going to use Eclipse to write my Java code, and I'm going to use MySQL Workbench to actually create the table in MySQL. So I'm going to go through the steps one by one and show you how to do it. So let's get started. The first thing we have to do is create a table in MySQL. So I've opened up MySQL Workbench. I've got RE45 as my active schema, and I don't have any tables in this schema right now. So I'm going to click on this icon to create a new table, and I'm going to call my table TBL book. And for the comment, I'm going to say it's the book table. And then I need 3 attributes. I'm going to use 3 attributes in my table. The first one is going to be book ID. And I'm going to use all lowercase because my instance of MySQL is set up for all lowercase. Then I want that to be the primary key, not null, type integer. So my next attribute is going to be bookname, like that. And I'm going to just leave that as a variable character, 45. And then the last attribute I'm going to call book author last name, just like that. And instead of 45, I'm going to make that 30. That's going to be long enough for that author's last name. Normally I put comments for each attribute, but I'm not going to do that this time, just to keep this video length as short as I can. Once I get my 3 attributes in there, then I can hit the apply button. That'll bring up the SQL statement to create this table. I hit apply, and that runs the statement and creates the table. So now I can click on this third icon here next to the table. It will run a select query and show me that I have my 3 attributes. My table is empty, and I'm through with step 1. So let's move on to step 2. In this step, we're going to configure Eclipse to use the GUI window builder function. So I've got my Eclipse already open. So what I'm going to do is go to Help, and I'm going to go to where it says Install New Software. And then I have to pick what I want to install. So if I click on the Work With, I'm going to go down here to this latest Eclipse simultaneous release and click on that. When I click on that, it populates this box with several different packages that I can download. I'm interested in the one under General Purpose Tools, so I'm going to expand that. Then I'm going to scroll down and pick up everything that is related to either Swing or Windows Builder. So I have these SWT tools. I'm going to go ahead and install that. And then I'm going to start here with Window Builder, and I'm just going to pick everything that says anything to do with Window Builder. And so I'm going to select all of those. And Window Builder. And so once I get all of those selected, I'm going to click Next. And it's going to download all of those packages and say, hey, here's the stuff that's ready to be installed. And so I see it's all SWT and Window Builder packages. So I'm going to click Next. I'm going to accept the license and hit Finish. And then down here in the lower right-hand corner, it says Installing Software, and it gives me a percentage of how much of it's been installed. So I'm going to let that run and get all that installed, and then we'll be through with step 2. And so I'll go to the next step and create a window application with a GUI in the next step. So once it's all finished now, and it says, it's asked me to restart Eclipse. So I'm going to restart it. We're going to come back and work on step 3. This is a short step, but what I found is if you do all these things in order, then you don't forget anything. So we're just going to keep going, and I'm going to break it up. And step 3 is to create a window for the application. So we're going to do a couple of things here. First, I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to do New Java Project. So I'm going to create a new Java project, and I'm going to call it BookAdder. And so we're going to add some books to our table. So I'm going to leave the defaults for everything else. Click Next. And then it comes up and says I've got a BookAdder folder and a source folder. And I'm just going to leave that as it is and click Finish. Then it says, do I want to create a module? I'm not going to create a module. I'm just going to click Don't Create. And that's going to set up the project for me. I can open the project. I've got a couple of folders here. So the next thing I need to do is right-click on this source folder because I'm going to add a class. So I go down to New, and I'm going to go down to Other for my class template. And I've got under the different kinds of classes that I can pick, I select this window builder class, and under Swing Designer, I can click Application Window. So that's what I want. I want to create a GUI, Application Window. And so I'm going to click Next. And then it asks me for a name. So I'm going to call it BookAdder, just like my source folder, and click Finish. And what that does, it creates a class called BookAdder. It has some code in there that's going to help me with the GUI and handle all of the things related to that. And so that's all for step 3. We just need to create our project and create our class. In step 4, we have to download some software that will allow us to connect our Java program to the MySQL database. So I've gone to Google and I did a search for MySQL JDBC connector. And this first thing that came up is download the connector. And so I'm going to click on that. Brings up this web page that says I can connect this connector J, and it gives me a version number. So for selecting the operating system, I'm going to select Platform Independent. And then that's going to bring up a couple of different places for me to download from. I can either get the zip file or the tar. And so I'm going to download the zip file. And once I download that, I can extract out the jar file that I need from that zip file. There's several other files in there, and I'm not going to go through all the download and unzip and all that, but this is where you get it. You can download it, unzip it, and use the jar file for the next step. Well, actually, to finish this step. So back in the project, we need to add that jar file to our project. So when I go into the JRE System Library folder here, I right-click on that. I can click on Build Path and then Configure Build Path. And that brings up the libraries that are in my project. So I want to add an external jar file, but that thing's grayed out. So I have to scroll up to this module path, click on that, and then I can add this external jar file. And so it's in my Downloads folder. I've got it there. There's my MySQL connector Java, and that's a jar file. So I click on that and click Open, and then I click Apply and Close. And now that JDBC connector is included in my project, and that'll give me access to several classes that I'm going to need to reference and methods that I'm going to need to call in my project. So that's the end of step 4. Let's move on to the next step. Well, we're finally set up and can start doing some actual Java coding now, or at least sneaking up on it. So what I'm going to do, I've got my application open here, and I'm going to, I've got this, this class open, this BookAdder class. It's got some default code in it. And one of the things I want to do is I want to kind of resize this, this window before I go into it. And so I'm going to make that window instead of 450, I'm going to make it 550 by 450, just so it'll have a little more room for me. And that's the size of just the blank window, the frame. And so I'll make those changes. And then down here, I click on this Design tab. And that's going to bring up this graphical user interface that allows me to add things to the GUI. So I'm going to first, I want to resize my screen a little bit. I'm going to drag a little bit of this stuff around so that I can see my controls a little better. And so I like to kind of make my palette of different widgets a little bit bigger and like that. So now I've got this palette out here. And what we're going to start with is we're going to use an absolute layout as the type of layout for our GUI. So the way you do that is you click on absolute layout. It goes to kind of a little reverse highlight there. It's selected. And then I let loose of my mouse. I just drag my mouse over to my GUI and I just click on it. And that adds the absolute layout to my GUI. Doesn't look like anything changed, but it's on there. So that allows me then to put some other controls on my palette. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to add some labels. So I'm going to click on this label and highlight that, the J label. Then I'm going to go over here to my GUI and I'm just going to click here near the top and that's going to create a label for me. So for that label, I'm going to increase the size of it a little bit. And I'm going to go over here to the properties. And so the properties area is over here on the left-hand side of the screen. And I'm going to make that a little bit bigger where I can kind of see some of the properties a little bit better. And it looks like that J label is kind of hanging out there. Maybe it'll go away in a minute. So I don't need to change the name of the variable, but instead of new label, I want to call that add a book, and I want it centered, and I want to change the font. I'm going to click on this font and I'm going to make it 16, and I'm going to make that bold and click OK. And you know what, I think I'm going to make it a little bit bigger than 16. So I'm going to make it I'll make it 18, and I really don't like that bold either. So I'm going to do it like that. So I've got a book, add a book, and that's going to be at the top there. Instead of the horizontal alignment, instead of leading, I want that centered. And that's all the changes I'm going to make to that one. So I can go back over here and select label again and add another label. So for that label, I want that to say, in the text, I want it to say book ID. And I want that to be a little bigger font too. I think I'm going to make that 14. No, I'm going to make it 16. And then click OK. And instead of the horizontal alignment, I want that to be right justified. And then I'm going to go back over to my GUI and make that a little bigger, like that. Then I'm going to add another label right underneath that one. And it's going to be called bookname. The horizontal alignment on that, I want to be right justified. And I'll make it the same size as my other one. And so I have to resize this box so that I can see it. And there's book name, and I'll line it up with book ID. And then I need one additional label. I'm going to put it right down here. And I'm going to call that one author last name. I want to make it right justified. I want to make it 16. Then I'll resize that box and then I'll line it up with the others. Just like that. So now I've got all my labels that I need on the form. Now, in order for me to actually enter data, I need some text fields. So I'm going to put some text fields next to each one of my labels. I'll just click on that JTextField. I drag my mouse over here, and I'm going to line it up at the bottom of Book ID. Click on it. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger, but not too much, and a little bit taller, but not too much. And so I'm going to change my font on that to 16 as well. And this text field, I need to actually give it a variable name so that I can use it in my software. So instead of calling it text field, I'm going to rename it to txtbookid, like that, all lowercase, and that's how I will find it in the program. So I need another text field, and I'm going to click on text field again, go over here, line it up, and I'm going to resize it a little bit. Make it a little longer. Now this one, I need to be able to type in 45 characters. So I'm going to increase the size of that. I'm going to drag it almost to the edge over there. And where it says columns over here, I'm going to say 45. And my variable name, I'm going to call that txtbookname. Oops. And then I'll make it 16 as well. And then I need another text field that I'll use for author last name. So I drag it here. I'm going to make it a little bit taller. I'm going to make it a little bit wider. And that's a little bit too tall. There you go. And I'm going to make it a little longer, and that one needs to be 30 columns. And I'm going to name it txtauthorlast. Author last. Then I'll change the font size to 16. And that's all the changes that I need on that one. And so the last little widget I need before I leave here is a button. And so the way the software is going to work is I'm going to fill out these three J fields. Then I'm going to click the button to actually add the data to the MySQL database. So I click on the button, I come over here to new button. I'm going to make it a little larger, and I'm going to name it button add book. And for the text on there, I'm just going to say add book. Okay, and so that will take care of that. I think I'll make that font a little bit bigger too. I'll just put that at 16. And that will take care of, that should take care of all we need to do for step 5 for building the GUI for the program. So we'll move on to step 6. Now that we've got our GUI set up, we're going to go and actually put some Java code in our project. So to do that, I'm going to click on this Source tab and go back to our source code. And you remember that we had, when we set this thing up, we had some default code that was put into our project here, into our class. And so we're in that code here, and I'm going to make a few changes. So at the very top, the first thing I need to do is you'll see that these text fields have been added as variables up here. And there's that frame that we first put in there. And then we have some text fields for each one of our text fields. But we have to make those public static so that we can access those throughout our class here. So I'm going to change those all to public static. The next thing we have to do is we have to add some variables that are going to let us actually work with the data out of these text fields. So I'll do that by creating 3 variables, and I'm going to make them public static as well. Book ID, book name, and author last is what I'll call them. The next thing we need to do is we have to go down to our main method here, our initializing, our method for the whole class here, or to our class, and we have to say that this will throw an exception because when we do work with all of this connection to the SQL database and things like that, it's possible that we're going to run into an error. So we're going to say that throws an exception. The next thing we have to do is we have to go over to back to the GUI because we're going to add some code behind our button. So I'm going to go back to the design area, and then on the button here that's on our GUI, I'm going to right click on that. And then I'm going to add an event handler, and then I'm going to click on action performed. And that's going to add some code in our class that we can go down here and make some changes to. So as soon as I click that button, it comes over here and gives us a place to put some extra code. So I'm going to put that code right here, and I'm going to add a couple of extra lines. And so what I need to do is I need to do a try, and then I'm going to put within that a method that we're going to create later. We haven't done it yet, but it's going to be bookadder.post, and we're going to call that method. And then if we have a problem, then we're going to catch an error. And that exception, we're going to call it E1. And if we have an error, what we're going to do is we're going to print something to the system. So I'm just going to say system out E1, and that will tell us whatever the error is in our console down here. Now I'm getting an error because I don't have this post function or this post method defined yet, and so once we code that, that'll go away. And so I've got a couple extra spaces here I'll get rid of, and there's the code that we need in here in order to to make the button fire. So the next thing we need to do is we need to go down here close to the bottom outside of this area, and I'm going to add some blank lines, and we need to go in here and do a create a database connection. So I'm just going to put a comment in here. And then I'm going to close that out. So instead of going in and just keying all this up while you watch on the screen, I went ahead and paused the video and keyed up the connection method here. And so I'm going to walk through it here and kind of describe what this thing is doing to establish the connection. Before I do that though, I want to point out a couple of things here. One is we've got this under connection, we get this red underline because it hasn't brought in that connector library yet, or the methods from that library. So if I highlight, or if I just move my mouse over connection, then I want to go down and import this connection from java.sql. I don't want to get that stuff from Sun. And when I do that, it gets rid of the red underline under connection. Still have one under driver manager. So if I highlight over that, I can import that driver manager method, and then it gets rid of those errors there. So let's see what I've got, another error. Connection cannot be resolved to type. So we'll see about that once we get this thing going and see if those are really going to be errors for it. But let me describe the issue here, or describe the code that I've got. So we have to create this connection string in order to connect to our MySQL database. And we need a couple of things. First of all, we need to know what driver we're using. So we're using this JDBC driver that we brought in. The connection string starts with JDBC : MySQL : / and then it gives a location for the instance of MySQL. In this case, we're at studentmysql.temut.local, and that could be any IP address or any name that could be resolved to an IP address for the instance of MySQL. Then we've got the port number 3306, and then the schema, in this case that we are using is RE45. Then the username and the password for that particular connection is all set up in that string. Then I have to use this code here for the connection. So I set up this connection, and then basically this is just the syntax for the URL, the username, and the password, which is set up above here. And then if it worked, I say you're connected to the database, and I return the connection to whoever called this particular method. So if not, it gives an exception and says, hey, there's a problem somewhere, and that comes out on the console. So that is the code for the connection. And the next thing I have to do is I have to create this post method, and I'm gonna call that insert record, like that. And I'm gonna give myself a couple of blank lines. And I'm going to pause the video and then copy that code in, and then I'll talk about that code as well. Now I've got the insert a record, that post method entered into the code here, and I'm going to walk through it. First thing I want to do is, you notice I've got these errors of some methods that need to be imported. So I'm going to just hover my mouse over this J option pane and import the Java swing code for that. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this prepared statement out of Java SQL and bring those in. And so that gets rid of those errors. And up here in this code, here's the post method. It's going to throw an exception. So the first thing I do is I take those variables that I created above and I bring in the information from the text areas on the form and assign them to these variables so that I can work with them. And I have some very limited error checking in this particular piece of software. You could do a lot more error checking, but what I do is I say if the txt book name is equal to blank, then send a message out that says the book name is blank. You got to enter a book name. And so otherwise, if the book is not empty, if there's something in the book name, then I go to this next if statement. If book statement is not blank, then I'll do this code to actually, put something in the database. So I use a try because there's a possibility for an error there. And so this connection thing gets the connection from the connection method above and connects to the database. And then here's basically the kind of the crux of the matter is this prepared statement. So the prepared statement is where I go in and I actually put some SQL code into this thing and then I run the code. So here's the SQL statement. I want to insert into this table these three field names, and then here are the values. And so that's just like any SQL insert statement. We just insert into the table, we give it what we want to insert, and then we tell the values. One of the things that's kind of a little bit difficult is getting all the syntax right for the values. And so in the values, what you have to do is you have to put the variable name in quotes and inside these plus marks, and then a comma, and then, so if it's an integer value, you do it with a quote, inside quotes, inside the pluses. And if it is a text value, then you have to add single quotes to the whole thing, as you see here. So this first one is an integer value. This is a string value, and then authorlast is also a string value. So for the string values, you have to add these single quotes to make that thing come out right. You put all that in parentheses, you enclose the whole thing in quotes. This closing quote closes the quote inside just before the insert. And so there's quite a lot of syntax involved in that. Then I do my close parenthesis and then end the statement. So all that is set up to prepare the SQL statement. And so with this SQL statement, I'm using these variables right here that contain the information I want. And then I'm using the actual field names out of the MySQL database in the first part of the insert statement. Then I execute that update, and that runs this statement. So then I put some messages out here in the console to give me the book ID, the book name, and the author last name. And if I have an error, then I print out, I've got an error. And then finally, I print record added. And so I'm going to print record added whether it gets added or not. But that's just, you can do a lot more with error checking and so forth with the system. So the next thing I'm going to do is in step 7, I'm going to compile this program, run it, and see if we can get some records added to our table. I've opened up MySQL and gone back to the book table that we created at the first of the exercise. I'm just going to run that thing and show that there's nothing in that table right now. I've got those 3 attributes identified, but it's not showing any data in there. So I just wanted to check on that, and I'll come back to it, hopefully, and find some records in a few minutes. So now I'm back in my Java program, and I'm going to click on the this little play button to run the software. So now it runs my little window here. I got my interface, my GUI interface, where I can add some things. So I'm going to go ahead and add book number 1. I'm going to call my first book David and Goliath, and I'm going to put Gladwell as the author of that book, and I'll just click Add a Book. Okay, so if I look down here in my console, it says I successfully connected to the database. That's a good message. Gives me the name of the book, the author, and it says record added. There's my book number. So that's a good sign that I've got a book in there. So I could have also cleared these text fields out, but I didn't do it. So I'm going to go ahead and book number 2. And I'm going to put, I'll just put Blink, another Gladwell book, and I'll click Add a Book. And it says, got 2 books in there, and looks like I got 2 records in there. Looks like it worked. So in order for me to verify that, I'm going to go back into my MySQL Workbench, and I'm going to run this select query again and see if those 2 books come up. Great, they came up. So here's book number 1, David and Goliath by Gladwell. Book number 2, Blink by Gladwell. And I've got a couple of records in my database. I could probably mess it up by trying to add another book number 1, and I would get an error. But I'm not. This is not a video about how to fix errors and create errors. This is just a straight through a walkthrough on putting data in the database, and so that's the process and the functions that you have to go through to get data into a MySQL database using Java code. I hope you're successful in getting your code running where you can insert a record into a MySQL database as well.